everybody. Welcome to Self-Help FAQ once again. Today is Follow-Up Friday, and I've had two comments or questions that came in that touched me a little bit emotionally because I can relate to both of them. And so I had to take some time to think about it and to get away from being too emotional about them and be more logical and some empathy added in, so that I could give a good answer and help to them. So let's get started with that. The first commenter or person with a question is someone who suffers from conflict avoidance. And I think I can relate to that too, because I've been that way most of my life. And so in this person's concern is that when dealing with family members or even just friends, if something that they want to say will cause some kind of a conflict, then they're less likely to say anything at all. They just quiet and back away. But that's not really living your truth. Perhaps if while growing up, if you had a struggle or if you had a conflict, and if you were going to say anything, if you thought that it would cause some kind of guilt or some kind of explosion from the other person, or maybe withdrawal or a silent treatment, then avoiding it really wasn't your flaw. It's just your survival instinct. So that's what's going on. It's not really a character flaw, like I've said before. This one is about wanting to survive and keep things intact. So when one of your decisions might upset someone, your system doesn't see it as a choice, it sees it as danger. And so that's why you might be going back and forth in your head, and that's why clarity might feel hard. And here's why conflict-avoidant people might get stuck. They think the choice is between keeping the peace or blowing everything up. So instantly inside they want to delay, they want to soften things, and so they talk themselves into keeping quiet. But there's a third option that's not talked about often enough, and that's when you can make a decision inside yourself without creating immediate conflict around you. So decision-making and confrontation are not the same thing. Clarity doesn't start with what you say to other people. It starts with what you say to yourself on the inside, how you settle yourself on the inside. Now remember, you're not responsible for other people's emotions or what they're going to do. You're only responsible for your own emotions and what you're going to do. So on the inside, you'll make the decision, this person is too explosive, they are trying to guilt trip me or things like that. I'm not going to put up with it anymore. I need my sanity. So what do you do after you've decided this? That you keep in mind that you're not emotionally responsible for what they're going to do, only what you're going to do. So let's take a little example. Once you've made the decision, I'm going to do what's right for me. Your next question is, all right, now how am I going to deal with that other person? So especially if this other person explodes or they want to throw a guilt trip on you, they yell, they put a pressure on you, or they escalate when they don't get their way for what they want. So let me give you some realistic options of what you can do in this case. So one of the biggest mistakes that conflict-avoidant people make is over-explaining. Explosive people don't calm down with more information. They use the information against you so that they can argue some more with you. So instead of saying something like, I can't come because I'm exhausted, I've had a long weekend, and I just really need time for myself, try, I won't be able to make it this time, and then stop. No defending, no justifying, no adding emotional padding. Silence after a clear statement is not rude, it's containment. And explosive people often, they want an immediate reaction. They demand it. You're allowed to slow this interaction down, and it can sound like this way you can slow it down. I'm not going to continue this conversation right now. I'll talk when we're both calmer, or I'm going to step away right now. And then you actually step away. You don't need permission to pause. You know, another option, which is just hanging up the phone, that's not childish if the other person is yelling or if they're shaming you or trying to escalate things. You can say, all right, I'm ending this call right now, and hang up. You're not required to stay present for emotional dumping, verbal aggression, or manipulation. Ending that call is what we call boundary enforcement, and I've had to do it. It's not punishment. You've got a boundary, you got no other way to protect it than hang up the phone. Sometimes you just have to do it. And you know, often explosive people, when they can't get their way one way, they try next. When anger doesn't work, they'll move to guilt, sometimes the other way around. They might say things like, I do everything for you. You're selfish. You're hurting me. I guess I don't matter. You do not need to argue with guilt. You can respond with, well, I hear you're upset, and stop there. You don't have to accept blame in order to acknowledge feelings. You can also just let them be upset without fixing it. This is the hardest one for conflict-avoidant people. You kind of have to tolerate the fact that someone's going to be angry, someone may be disappointed, someone might sulk, they might even go and complain to others that you both know or behind your back. And you still don't fix it because their emotions belong to them. Your job is not to regulate other people's reactions. And clarity doesn't come from just one conversation. It comes from patterns. So instead of asking, did I handle that perfectly? You ask yourself, does this person calm down over time? Or do they escalate every time they don't get their way? The answer matters. And with that said, I want to go on to the second comment because I'll be able to tie these two together. And before I move on to that, you may be hearing some kind of scraping going on. That's because we recently got a snowstorm, and so someone has now decided to shovel right outside my window. So you might be hearing that. Anyway, on to the second comment. The second commenter said that, and this was because right after they had heard about or watched the jealousy video, they described jealousy as an emotional bruise and said that knowing that your partner is sensitive is important to protect them from hurting. So describing jealousy as an emotional bruise is a really good metaphor. An emotional bruise can come from the past. It can feel tender even when nothing new is wrong. And it can be activated even accidentally. That part is true. But the phrase that deserves a little more attention is this idea of protecting a sensitive partner from hurting. Because that word sensitive can mean different things. And you have to be careful when you're using it or if you're thinking about it. And so here's the distinction I want to make. Sometimes jealousy is about the wounds being touched. But sometimes jealousy is a signal that a boundary has been crossed. And those two are not the same thing. If a boundary is crossed, whether it be especially around honesty, transparency, or trust, the reaction then isn't sensitivity. It's a value-based response. And calling this jealousy feeling, when this is happening, calling it sensitivity can be unintentionally dismissive because it moves attention away from the other person's behavior and it puts the focus on the injured person's reaction. It turns a trust issue into an emotional management issue. In other words, it reframes something happened that violated an agreement into you're just reacting strongly. And those are very different narratives. Now, I don't think the commenter meant any harm by that comment, but a more accurate and more respectful way to express that sentiment would be something like, jealousy can come from old wounds, and partners still have a responsibility to be mindful of how their choices affect trust. That framing does two things. It acknowledges emotional history. It also acknowledges present-day responsibility, because responsibility should be shared, not shifted to one person. Jealousy is information. It's not a rule book. And it's not something one partner is responsible for preventing at all costs. And this is where clarity changes everything. Clarity asks different questions. Instead of, how do I avoid upsetting someone? Or am I just being sensitive? Or how do I make myself okay with this? Clarity asks, what am I actually agreeing to here? Is this about managing emotions or protecting trust? And what line matters to me, even if it causes discomfort? Clarity doesn't mean confrontation. It means you stop arguing with yourself. And when that happens, something shifts. You stop rehearsing conversations. You stop minimizing your reactions, and you stop negotiating with your standards. And that's where peace comes from. So if you're conflict avoidant, or you've ever been told you're too sensitive, here's what I want you to hear. Not all discomfort is emotional fragility. Sometimes it's your values asking to be respected. Clarity doesn't mean being harsh. It doesn't mean being confrontational. It means being honest with yourself about what matters and refusing to talk yourself out of it. That's not selfish. That's self-respect. And with that, here's today's journal question. And the question is, where have I been managing other people's comfort at the expense of my own clarity? And what boundary might that be pointing to? And an alternative journal question for the conflict avoidant people is this one. Which reactions from other people am I most afraid of? And how have I been protecting them from those reactions at my own expense? Now, I think that these two things, emotional responsibility and versus emotional caretaking, deserve a video on their own. So sometime in the future, maybe during this week, I'll cover that. Or it might fit in with another follow-up Friday. I might even make it next Friday's follow-up Friday. I just have to think about it for a while. Thanks a lot for stopping by, and I hope this helped you. And I'll see you next Monday for our video 4 in this 12 video series on boundaries and all the subcategories of boundaries. And thanks for stopping by, and I will see you next time here on Self-Help FAQ, the YouTube channel. Take care. Have a great day. Bye for now.